Hello, everybody. We'll get started in a couple minutes. So why am I doing this stream today? So I am going to be on with Last Things tomorrow at 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time. I guess for me that would be 7 to 9 Eastern Central Time, which is the time zone I'm, of course, in. And I've been rereading a lot of IR stuff because we're going to be talking about Attack on Titan, which I kind of feel is like the best, one of the best portrayals of how international relations work. Uh, the competing of states, the zero sum game of international diplomacy, the security dilemma, weapons of mass destruction, all that kind of stuff. I think Attack on Titan is arguably one of the best, if not the best, portrayal of that you can really get, at least in an anime. Um, I think it really brings a lot of specific issues to light. Um, and how a lot of things are just mutually uh, exclusive from each other. So, what we're going to start off by doing is we're going to go through a couple different definitions of democracy, and then we're going to go through and look at how many actual wars between democracies are. Because if you look at like the claim is, let's go to democratic peace theory because I think they have a list of wars here. Let me just share this in the yeah. By the way, I've been replaying Suzerain. I've done my third playthrough. My first playthrough, I got invaded by Ruinberg and everything collapsed. Second playthrough, I won re-election with a booming economy and maintaining soulless values. And then the third game, I got voted out of office, but I became one of the richest men in the world. So that's cool. Autocracies versus democracies. So the idea of democratic peace theory is that um, democracies almost never go to war with one another. Let's see here. Number list of wars between democracies. So we'll go through the list of wars, but basically the idea is let's just read through because there's a good summary. Argue that both liberal and republican forms of government are hesitant to engage in armed conflict with the other identified democracies. Different advocates of the theory suggest that several factors are responsible for motivating peace between democratic states. Individual theorists maintain democracies are in general more peaceful in their international relations. Uh, in the international system, make the international system more peaceful. There's also the idea that within a democratic society, the people are naturally opposed to democracy, to war because they don't want to be drafted, they don't want to spend money on a war, and that is generally speaking unpopular. Although there's a lot of things that tend to go against this, as oftentimes elections during war result in the current government winning massive majorities. And wars are often popular among the people. That's often viewed as like one of the ways to get away with political unpopularity is to go ahead and start a war. So let's see here. Let's see here. I'm just trying to see because there should be a list here. Let's see. Number of wars between democracies. Is it true? No, two. Uh, okay, war between democracies. I'm just trying to find it because I believe the assertion is that it hasn't happened, like ever. Let's see here. Okay, well, we'll get to this. Okay. There has been 82 unique wars between January 1980 and September. None of them involved democracies. I'm just trying to see how many it says. Uh, Here. I'm just trying to find this. So, generally speaking, it is that democracies either never go to war or they do go to war, or otherwise it's exceedingly rare. So let's just go through this because it's I think it's important because I see this a lot with like the current Ukraine conflict, with the Gaza Israel one, and all that kind of stuff. So let's look at democracy and how it's defined in various sources. Democracy, a government by the people, especially rule of the majority. Okay, so that's the first definition: is rule of majority. A government in which supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation involving periodically holding free elections. The common people, when constituting, is the source of political authority. The absence of hereditary or arbitrary class distinction and privileges. Okay, so let's see. That's one. Britannica states democracy is a system of government in which laws, policies, leadership, and other major um, undertakings of a state or other polity are directly or indirectly decided by the people. Historically constituted, a group only constituted by a minority of the population, but generally instead understood since the mid 20th century to include all or nearly all adult citizens. Let's see here. The rule by the people. So basically, we have rule by the majority. Oh, the stream isn't loading. What? What's going on? Uh, okay. Let me. I'm not sure really how to fix it if it's not loading. Um, oh, I'll just give it a minute. Hopefully, it'll. Uh, oh, okay. There we go. It looks like it's working again. Okay, so let's see here. What are some other definitions of democracy? Okay. According to the United Nations, democracy, the UN supported democracy. Okay, I'm just trying to find where it defines it. Um, I don't think it's actually defined. No, I don't see a definition. Um, there isn't a definition. It's just saying that it's a good thing. Let's see here. Democratic governance is a set of values and principles that should be valued for greater participation, equality, security, and human development. Democracy provides an environment that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms, and in which the freely expressed will of people is exercised. People have a say in all decisions and can hold decision makers to account. Women and men have equal rights, and all people are free from discrimination. Um, so yeah, once again, it's there is no consistent definition of democracy. Let's see if we can find some other definitions, and then we'll get into the wars because I think it is definition of democracy. Once again, for those of you who aren't here, I will be on last things to discuss international relations, morality, nationalism, and all that kind of stuff with last things tomorrow, uh, 8 to 10 Eastern Standard Time. Okay, let's see here. What is democracy? Democracy means demos and kratos, meaning power. So democracy can be thought of as power of the people. There are many different models of democratic government around the world that is sometimes easier to understand the idea of democracy in terms of what it is not. Democracy then is not an autocracy or dictatorship where one person rules, and is not an oligarchy where a small segment rules. Uh, why is this having trouble? I'm not. I'm trying to. Let's see here. I don't think I have any. Let me just see different if it works for me. Models of democratic government around the world that is sometimes easier to understand the idea of democracy in terms of what it is not. Democracy then is not an autocracy or no, it's running fine for me, so I don't know what it is. The idea that no one should be okay. So why democracy? Um, okay, individual autonomy, the idea that no one should be subject to rules which have been imposed by others. People should be able to control their own lives within reason. Okay, that contradicts each other immediately. The idea that everyone should have the same opportunity to influence the decisions that affect people in society. So basically, there is no definition beyond a very loose conception that it's ruled by the people, and it can be majoritarian, it can be non-majoritarian, it can be representative, it can be non-representative. um, it doesn't have vested in the people and exercised electly by them or against them under a free electoral system, whatever that means. Let's see, what are some other ones? A political system that allows citizens to participate in political decision making or to elect representatives to government bodies. Now, we'll get into this, but the irony is I think the definition of democracy personally is whatever it's democracy is when what you support wins, and autocracy is when what you support loses. I think is the best way of doing it. If another country does something you agree with, that is democracy. If another country does something you don't agree with, that is not democracy. I think that's probably the best way of describing it, personally, as to what democracy is and what democracy isn't. Democracy is something you agree with. Non-democracy is something you disagree with. So, let us go through the various organizations here and see which of these are democracies. So, we have the Haitian Revolution. I don't know a ton about what Haiti was like at that time. Was that during the Empire of Haiti, which is like the lamest thing ever? No, I don't know. Okay. We have the Civil War in Switzerland between the Helvetic Republic and the Federalists. Is it still like? Because I tried it and it's working fine on my end. Like, it's I'm not having any issues. Like when I try to load the stream up and run it myself. So I don't know. It is what it is. Nothing I can do, but I digress. Let's see here. I can't change my bit rate while the stream is running, unfortunately. At least let me check. I'm pretty sure I can't. No, I can't. Okay, so I don't know what the issue is. So, like, if we go into this, just we're going to start at the 19th century. But you have a war in Switzerland between the Federalists and the Decentralists. And I mean, both of those are different types of democracy. The question is, did we want a slightly more centralized state or a completely decentralized state? But both of them are like Republican democracies. Okay, let's go down here. So, Irish Rebellion. I'm not really sure. Okay, well, it says here representative government, national independence. So, the question is, does the British Empire count as a democracy? If we look at it from purely an electoral standpoint, let me just go back. I'm just trying to find a list of elections. List of UK general elections. We had general elections in the UK going back to 1802. We might have had elections going back even further than that. But my point is that we have elections, and they are to a certain extent free elections because, as you can see here, we do have periodic changes in power. Now, there was not universal suffrage, obviously, until we get into, I think, the mid 19th century with the Reform Act. But you did have competitive elections where people, perhaps a smaller definition of people, were able to vote and elect representatives. So theoretically, you could say any election in the 19th century, any war in the United in the yeah, any war in the 20 in the eight ugh, any war in the 19th century, the 1800s that involved the UK is a democracy on one side. So, if we're to look at the Napoleonic Wars, that's another kind of difficult one. Does France count as being a democracy during this time period? Um, okay, I'm not really sure what else I can do at this point because once again I'm not having the same issue when I try to load this. Let's see if there's something I could do. Enable DVR. Uh, I don't know. Maybe try lowering your quality settings and see if that helps. But once again, I'm not getting any errors on my end. Uh, okay, edit your stream title and description. Okay. Well, yes, we can. So, if we want to look at the Napoleonic Wars, it depends on how you define the French Republic, because there were elections. If you look at the French Republic, there was and the elections on the Ancien regime, they were competitive because you had multiple different governments. You had the Jacobins, you had the Thermidors, the Gurdinists, the I forget what they were called, the Plain. You had repeated changes in government um, throughout that particular time period. So, um, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Like, I just sometimes I will in OBS get a message saying that there's a problem with bitrate, and sometimes I went into YouTube and I tried to watch it and it was going fine. So apologies. It might be your local internet. It might be me, but we'll just yes, we can. So you did have competitive elections. I believe you also had elections under Napoleon. Now, there's also the question of, and this is, I think, a big thing, and we're going to talk about this a lot as we go along. Do do rigged elections count if they would have gone the same way if they weren't rigged? Like Napoleon, I think there was a referendum. Yeah, there was the Napoleonic referendum to change the the consulate to an empire, of which 99.9% voted for it. Now, obviously, that didn't happen. It's not physically possible. You would imagine like the number of people who would mismark their ballots would also be would not even be that. Then the question is, would the majority of the French population have supported the transition to an empire? Yeah, I don't think there's really any question that people weren't happy um, to end the chaos and anarchy of the revolutionary years and to have a stable, competent government under Napoleon. And this is when we get into stuff like Russia. Does Russia have fraudulent elections? Probably. Does the majority of the population support Putin and United Russia? Yes. So you could argue it's a case of things being overdetermined, perhaps, wherein, um, yeah, so overdetermined. Okay, so you could argue with the Napoleonic Wars. Also, there's the question of whether having a strong executive necessarily makes something a non democracy. Because a lot of people prefer strong executives, there's also the case that the executive in a lot of states, like the president, is elected by the nation as a whole rather than representing a local constituency, and so they should have more power. There's also, when we get into the papal states, it's another interesting question because it is an elect. They do have elections. They are free elections. Um, and as the papal states has very few citizens, I'm not sure are cardinals citizens of the papal states. If someone could put that down. We have the War of the Third Coalition. Once again, we have France, Italy, a republic here, and United Kingdom. I don't. I have no idea what that is. We have another war between democracies. Let's see. Ottoman Empire was not a democracy. I'm just going through this. Uh, Russian Empire. I'm just going through. I'm not sure what the status of Sweden was at that particular time. Let's see. Was it democratic? No, I think that was when Sweden was an absolute monarchy, so that doesn't count. Let me know in the chat if this is working any better. Okay, with the gunboat war, I'm not sure once again what the status of Denmark Norway was during this time period, if they had elections. Uh yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't think that was democratic during that time period. Of course, we had the Peninsula War, which was also, if we're going to count, once again, it depends how we're going to count France and the United Kingdom. Um, Through this, go down a bit. Okay, so let's go to the end of the Napoleonic Wars. So then this brings, okay, let's go to the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Now, Spain during this time period was a clusterfuck. There's a book that I would recommend that I think is pretty good. It's a biography of Simone Bolivar. Let me just take a peek at it. I'm trying to remember what it was called. That it really kind of summarizes what a mess this time period was in Spain. Give me a second. I think it's called The Liberator or something. It's some like generic name like that. Taliban. Caesar's Legion. It was really far back. I got this. Just looking through my Audible account to try to find where I had it. Chernobyl. Oh, I have too many audiobooks that I haven't read. Or I haven't listened to, I guess. But I guess it is what it is. I mean, there's nothing I could have just I couldn't have not purchased the the books. I couldn't have done that. That would have been unreasonable. Uh, Find it. I think it was just called The Liberator or something like that. But it was a good book. Let's see here. The Oh no, it's just called Bolivar. Okay, it's just called Bolivar American Liberator. So, one of the big issues with Spain during this time period is they kept going back and forth between being a liberal government and a conservative government. And some of the provinces revolted because the Spanish government was too liberal, and some of them revolted because it was too conservative. Like some of them were concerned that the Spanish were going to abolish the racial caste system and bring in complete equality. And other people were concerned that Spain was going to reassert absolute control over the colonies. And basically, they pleased no one. So, but I'm going to give it a pass because Spain was just a mess during this time period. No, I'm talking about Spain post Napoleon um, during the revolutionary years. Let's see here. Sixth coalition, or I guess the wars of independence started earlier, but it's it's complicated. Let's just go past this. We have okay, Zulu, United Provinces of Grenada. Once again, was Grand Colombia under Simon Bolivar a democracy or not? I mean, it was a republican form of government. From my understanding, Bolivar was elected president. It's actually very interesting with Bolivar. It's the only case I can really think of there being a democratic personal union. Sorry, a republican personal union, because he was elected as the president of a number of different countries. Obviously, like Bolivia, Gran Colombia, I think Peru as well. But it's kind of a weird case. I can't really think of it, to be honest. Just going down. British Empire. We see more of this. We're going to see, okay, Central American War. I'm not sure. I would imagine, once again, it's hard in Latin America because in some cases the conservatives were pro federal government, and in some cases they were pro decentralization, and the inverse. Okay, so we have the Decembrists, we have the yeah, so once again, we're getting into the various republics of Latin America, and it's very hard to tell who's who at this point in time. I'm not sure what the current scheme was at this point, but yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the 1830s. Uh, the Carlist Wars, Venezuela. Okay, here's a good one: Republic of Texas versus Mexico. I mean, whether or not Mexico was a democracy during this time period is very questionable. I believe that, let me see if, I think I can't recall if Santa Anna came to power in a fake election or it was a military coup. Um, let's see. I think Santa Anna came to power in a military coup. It's very confusing when you start getting into Mexican elections. But let's see here, legislative elections. I am looking for. So we're just going to say Santa Mexico is not a democracy during that time period. I think it was a a military junta. But with Mexico, it's very hard to tell. What am I doing? Um, I'm looking at various wars throughout the 19th and 20th century and trying to determine how many of them were between different democracies were between democracies, because one of the foundational principles about of modern diplomacy is the idea of a democratic peace theory, wherein democracies do not go to war with each other. So we have a war between South American republics. Once again, it's I'm not sure how you can call that, to be honest. You had a number of wars, uprisings against the United Kingdom, both in Canada and in Ireland, between two sides, one of which was at least a partial democracy, and the other of which would have established a democratic republic had it been successful. So let's see here. We have Egyptian Ottoman War. I believe France at that time period was under the Kingdom of France, which had elections and was a constitutional monarchy. It was, you could even argue that it was a liberal democracy. I think there was a restriction on voting based on wealth requirements, but the country at that point in time was both liberal and democratic, as was the United Kingdom. Let's go down here. Once again, you have another election between different, at least quasi democratic states in Latin America. I'm just going down. Let's see here. Dominican Republic and Haiti. I'm not sure what the status of Haiti was during this. Oh, no, that was the Second Empire of Haiti. Once again, it's hard to really know during these time periods whether or not there was broad public support for a particular system. Okay, I know I'm not doing very well so far, but we'll get through it. Yes, we can. The question of Prussia is always an interesting one as well, because Prussia did have elections, particularly once we get into the Germany. Germany had elections, and the Social Democrats actually won some of the elections. So it's not as if there was not competitive elections, and it was not as if things change periodically over time. So let's go. Here's a good one. You have the CSA versus the USA. I mean, both the United States and the Confederacy were democracies, arguably liberal democracies. They had different conceptions of what democracy meant, mostly in terms, I don't think there was a difference really in terms of voting. Um, I think free blacks in the North could vote. I'm not entirely sure. But it was more so in terms of how centralized political power should be. So you could argue that that was definitely a war between two democratic states. There's also the question of, is it more democratic to allow the South to leave after they vote to leave, or is it more democratic for the United States of America to invade and forcibly put them back under it? You also have the coup of Napoleon III, wherein he came to power in a constitutional referendum, where he won 92% of the vote. Now, once again, was the referendum rigged? It probably was. But do I doubt that the majority of the French people supported Napoleon III? No. So once again, is electoral fraud necessarily undemocratic if it confirms what would have been the result anyways? I mean, this is something that happens within modern democratic societies. Like in Canada, there was talk of electoral reform, but Justin Trudeau shut down electoral reform on the grounds that electoral reform would prevent parties from winning large majoritarian governments and prevent them from just ruling without coalitions. So, keeping the electoral system in a specific way to prevent smaller parties from participating in government and to basically over determining election results is considered an acceptable aspect of modern governments. So we have that. Let's keep going. We have America. Well, if we're gonna go with the whole thing that the democracy. So what we're told is that liberal democracy was the common form of government among Amerindian tribes in the New World. So I think we could probably put all of these down as being wars between democracies because the U.S. was a democracy, and indigenous people are by definition a democracy. So all of these count as well, unless we're going to go back on the narrative. Let's see the filibuster war. The filibuster war is like one of the greatest like memes of all time. I kind of love it. Let's see here. Indian Rebellion. What's interesting is I had always thought sepoy was a derogatory term, but sepoy just means private. Like I believe the modern Indian Army, yeah, the modern Indian Army continues to call private sepoys. Um, so it's not actually a derogatory term. It's just a term for infantrymen. Kind of like Sipahi is a generic term for cavalrymen. We had the Reform War. I'm just going through this. Sorry, I'm not doing very well at the moment, but in the words of the late, the great Barack Hussein Obama, yes, we can. The Pig War, that's an interesting one. Lebanon Civil War. We had the war between the Maori and the British. From my understanding, the Maori King movement is an elected monarchy. Yes, I think the Maori elect their own king, which I think is pretty base, to be honest. I actually don't mind the Maori. Um, I think they're fairly conservative as far as Amerindian or whatever you want to call them peoples go. Okay, let's keep going. Once again, I'm not sure what the status of Denmark was during this time period, whether it was a democratic country or not. On a side note, I think of like all the wars that was fought during German reunification. The Schleswig War was the most bullshit. Um, I don't think Germany had any claim to the area. The fact that it was given back to Denmark after World War One and Hitler didn't even contest it really says something. I think the only piece of territory that Hitler did not contest, I think there might have been one more, was Upper Schleswig, uh, or northern it. Like he didn't attempt to take it back from Denmark. I think there might have been one other one, but I can't recall. I think South Tyrol maybe. Let's see. Black Hawk War. Once again, we have more wars between democratic, indigenous tribes and other ones. We have the various wars between the Boer republics, which were, to my understanding, um, no, Canada has the worst internet in the developed world. I have stated this many times. It is absolutely horrendous. Um, because I would argue that the various Boer republics were democracies. In fact, part of the reason the war happened was because the Boer democracies, the Boer republics, did not allow non-citizens to vote. So the British citizens demanded the right to vote. Uh, Demanded the right to vote in local elections within the Boer republics, despite not being Boer citizens, and that was one of the causes of. I'm not sure if it was this war or another war. I'm not sure when did Austria start having elections. Because Austria did have elections. Let me see how far back did they go. Yeah, like Austria started having elections back during the 1840s. It's not as if Austria did not have them. I don't think. I think I'm pretty sure. Let's go through this and see if they were competitive or not. Okay, we have changes in Victor. Yeah, you have different parties winning. Some are in power for a long time. Okay, it looks like the Liberals were in power for a really long time. Although, isn't the fact that the Liberals keep winning in democratic election mean that Austro-Hungary was a liberal democracy? Party of Independence 48. It almost looks like Party of Independence 1488. Yeah, so you had different different parties who won some of the wars in won elections in Austro-Hungary. It's not as if there were not elections. Christian Social and Anti-Semitic Party, is that actually what it was called? Because that would be hilarious if that was what it was actually called. Oh, I love the Christian Social Party. Argent cells. Let's see here. Just going through. Once again, we have another war between the United States and democratic indigenous peoples. I forget the Glorious Revolution. Let's see here. Let me just go down. Oh yeah, the Red River Rebellion would be another one, as that would be a rebellion between the Dominion of Canada, which was a democracy, the British Empire, which was also a democracy, and the Métis, who wanted to set up a democratic republic as well. So that one counts. I'm not sure how elections within the North German Confederation worked, whether they had them or not. Oh no, the Christian Social Party was based. They were really based. It's kind of funny because I remember when I was reading Mein Kampf, the way that let's see here, Hitler describes Karl Lueger. That was when Rob Ford was the mayor of Toronto, and I always thought like he described him similar to the mayor of Toronto, because he thought he was like the greatest mayor in the history of I don't know. I don't know why you're not allowed to view the video. It says that it's running fine on my end. Uh, Maybe you can see like the VOD after it's done and it'll work. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It is what it is. Nothing I can do, but I digress. Okay, we have. Let's just go down. I'm not sure once again what the status is of was of countries was during the War of the Pacific, but I think you could argue that during this time period, um, you could argue that the both sides were democracies. No, Canada has the worst internet in the developed world. Canada internet developed world. Uh, yeah, because a lot of people think that like I've read this a lot. Uh, let's see here. Um, let's see here. Third world. Yeah, people have often called Canada having like third world internet. They really throttle it heavily. The issue is, and it's something that really irritates me. Um, is people will say that we have horrible internet in Canada because of how big the country is. But if you look at where people actually live within Canada, it's actually fairly densely uh, centralized into a couple areas. So, like for instance, one second, I just have to make a note of something. Yeah. So, like, if you look at it, like Canada's population really only lives, and this isn't really accurate because it makes some of these look bigger than it is. Like in my province, I think. Let's see, what percentage of the population lives in Winnipeg? Uh, I'm just trying to find this. Okay, so there's 750,000 people in Winnipeg. Let me see what percentage of Manitoba's population that is. I think it's literally like it's got to be over 50%. Okay, Manitoba's population is 1.4 million, and Winnipeg is approximately, um, depending on how you want to count it, so over half the population of Manitoba lives within a relatively small area in Winnipeg. So it's not as if like the Canadian population is spread out over like a massive area. Like it's pretty concentrated to a couple major urban centers, and people will be like, "Well, we can't build railways from southern Ontario to Vancouver," and it's like I don't even know if anybody really expects that. Why can't there be high speed rail in southern Ontario? I mean, that's like, look at this. Um, it is, yeah, that is the, yeah, Canada has the lowest internet speed among OECD countries. Uh, it's not good. Um, it's not good at all. It's a bunch of different things in Canada. Canada is not has very little competition um, between the different providers. It's kind of a duopoly between Robbers and Behel. So, anyways, back to it. We have the Boer Wars. I think you could count as democracy wars between democracies. I mean, the UK at that point, I think, had pretty much universal male suffrage, and South Africa was a republic. So there's that aspect to it. Let's see here. Let's go on. Once again, you have a war between Latin American countries. I'm not really sure how to classify that. There's the Northwest Rebellion, which was once again between a democratic country in Canada and an attempt to set up a democratic independent state. I wonder like how that counts. Do emergent states count as democracies? Like if part of a country declares independence and breaks away, is that a democracy or is that not a democracy? These are all very interesting questions. I think the Kingdom of Hawaii was a constitutional monarchy. I'm pretty sure Hawaii had elections. Yeah, Hawaii had elections during the time period. So you could also look at the um, the annexation of Hawaii as a conflict between democracies. Oh, let's see here. Now, what people will say is that because blacks couldn't vote in the Boer republics, they don't count as democracies. Canada doesn't count as a democracy because women couldn't vote. The UK doesn't count as a democracy because women couldn't vote. So the general thing is what people will say, and I admit there was fewer than I thought in the 19th century, but they will say none of these count because either there was property requirements to vote or women were not allowed to vote. And because women were not allowed to vote, that means these societies were not democracies. It is basically the approach that they will take. However, Amerindian societies were democracies, despite I'm pretty sure women couldn't vote in those either. So just keep up with the narrative, guys. Let's see here. Mahadist War. Yeah, the Franco-Prussian War, you could also argue, was a war between two democratic states. I'm pretty sure Germany had elections by that point in time. I forget when Japan started having elections. That's another question. I mean, wasn't the Empire of Japan democratic? Yeah, Japan started having elections back during the 1890s. Um, and we had the Liberal Party won during that time period. Although I think they were like a center right conservative party. That was an earlier incarnation. I'm not sure if the post war Liberal Party was a continuation or not. But yeah, like to do this, I'm pretty sure Spain had elections. Like you have to once again gerrymander. You have to say, oh, it's a monarchy. Like one of the things they'll do is if the king has any residual powers whatsoever. Um, we have the Boer War. I think you could also argue the Thousand Day War. I don't. It depends how you want to count the Colombian Conservative Party and the Colombian Liberal Party, but that's definitely possible. You also once again have another war between a uh, colonizer and a colonial power. Okay, so let's move into the 20th century because this was really when this whole theory became the big thing. This is when we have that kind of thing. Let's see here. Venezuelan crisis. I think Venezuela was a democracy during this time period. I'm not sure if it was a junta at this point in time. I don't think so. Uh, wait, there is another heavenly kingdom. Oh, okay, Western constitutional monarchy. Sorry, I'm just going through this. Okay, so I'm not doing very well, boys. I'm not doing very well. I might have to private this stream. There's fewer than I thought there would be. That might just be we haven't gotten to it yet. But yeah, once we get to the world wars, it'll definitely shoot up. Yeah, I'm gonna say like half of these depend upon how you count Latin American states. I don't have the time or the patience to go through each individual one and see if it was a civilian or military government during this time period. Like I'm not sure if during this time period Nicaragua and Honduras were democracies or not. At least nominally. Young Turk Revolution. States, Greek. Just trying to see. I think also maybe just because a lot of these are like kind of bullshit wars that no one really cares about. Uh, yeah, border war. That would be in a case in which you had the democratic governments of Mexico, if you want to count them as that way, versus America. Um, let's see, Sublime State, Russian Empire. Yeah, you could also argue the Italo-Turkish War. It really depends upon how you count the Young Turks. Like, do the Young Turks count as a early attempt at democracy? Um, do you count the King of Italy? I think is definitely a democracy during this time period. I don't think the king really had that many power, and liberal parties continued to win elections within the context of um, within that. So you could argue. I'm not really sure. The Ottoman Empire during this time period is kind of difficult to um, classify. Also, it depends when we get into stuff like the Balkan Wars, how you want to classify the Ottoman Empire and how you want to classify the various states. Because by this point in time, most countries had at least some form of elections. Oh, let's see here. Second Balkan War. Yeah, you had the Second Revolution, which, if I recall, was between Yan Shikai and Sun Yat Sun. So it depends whether or not you consider Yan Shikai's government, how you want to count Yan Shikai's government. France. Okay, World War One. So World War One is definitely a case of democracies fighting each other because, as we already established, they had elections in Austro-Hungary. If we look at elections in the German Empire, I'm pretty sure the Social Democrats. Yeah, like the Social Democrats won elections in the German Empire. Um, actually, the biggest, like, so part of the thing to keep in mind about the German Empire is you had Culture Kampf, where they attempted to destroy the Catholic culture in Germany. So all the Catholics just formed their own party and all voted for the Catholic Center Party, and the Catholic Center Party just started winning elections, which I find pretty funny, and they became the dominant kingmaker. But yeah, within the German Empire, you had competitive elections all the time. I'm pretty sure the Center Party normally won a plurality just because all the Catholics would vote for it. But you had the Conservative Party would sometimes be in power, the National Liberals would sometimes be in power. Eventually, you would start to have the Social Democrats become bigger and bigger. I'm not sure if the Social Democrats ever governed because the various right wing and liberal parties uh, would form coalition governments, but there was competitive elections. And the Kaiser did have limited powers, which became more limited as time went on. See, Republic of China. Once again, it depends how we count Haiti during this time period. It depends how you count the Ottoman Empire during this time period. But no, World War One, like the biggest war, I would definitely argue. Um, yeah, you had the Easter Rising. You had a whole bunch of cases once again where you had Democratic Republican uprisings against the United Kingdom. Let's see here. I don't think you can really count Russia as a democracy during this time period. It's also when we start to get into the curious case of post Tsarist Russia. because you did throughout the Soviet Union have direct representation, direct participation of the average person in government. You had local councils of party members. You had elections. You have stuff like that happening, and particularly during some parts of the Soviet Union, you had a lot of participation from the average person. And it's like when we start to get into Maoism, widespread direct participation of the public is like a core component of Maoism. Um, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's see here. The Bolsheviks had support of, I think it was about a quarter to a third of the Russian population. Let's see here. You had the various revolutions within the context of the collapse of Austro-Hungary. We have the German Revolution. Let's see here. Once again, a lot of this depends on how you want to count the Bolsheviks during this time period. Whether you want to say they were a democratic movement or not, because they did have significant support from the population, but the white movement also had significant support from the population. It really depends on what part of the country you're referring to, as some parts were more pro Soviet and some parts were more pro white movement. Let's see here. It also, once again, depends on how you want to count socialist states and that sort of thing. Yeah, Irish War of Independence, that's a good example. You have the Greco-Turkish War, which is an interesting one. It depends if we want to count the Republican Turkey under Ataturk as being a democratic state or not. Because it was a republic, and part of Kemalism, if I recall, is democracy. So, is it a democratic state or is it not a democratic state? I think you could make a good case one way or another when it comes to the Turkish comes to that. Let's see here. We have. I love how it's the far right Freikorps. It's always the. It's always far right. Oh, the Rif Republic. Okay, there's a democratic republic versus another democracy. We have. Here. Let's go. There was a kingdom of Kurdistan. When did that happen? Based? I didn't know there was a kingdom of Kurdistan. You find out stuff all the time when you like go surfing through Wikipedia. Let's see here. Yeah, once again, the Chinese Civil War is another interesting case. I think you can argue that didn't count. Once again, it depends how you want to count the various warlord factions during the Chinese Civil War. But what was this? Cypriot Revolt. Yeah, but you could argue was the Empire of Japan really not a democracy? You had competitive elections. You had limits to the power of the emperor. It was more of an oligarchy, but we have oligarchies now. Oligarchy is kind of a fundamental aspect of any sort of democracy. Most democracies are plutocratic in nature, in contrast to the aristocratic. You could argue Mexico under the perfect dictatorship was a democratic government. The Cristeros were just based, so there's that. Let's see here. What's going on? Once again, a lot of these are pretty minor wars. And this brings us to the case of Nazi Germany. Now, the Nazis won elections. They had the referendum, which was rigged, but I don't think they would have lost it. And once again, this comes back to the issue, like when you had the Enabling Act and you had the various referendums to give a um, Japan was not a democracy according to Krupp because of my evil army. I mean, it depends once again, like how you want to count things. Japan was really weird during this time period. There's also the question of totalitarian states because totalitarian states often involve more participation from the average person. Like, if we want to talk about democracy as participation and directly reflecting the will of the public, very often within a totalitarian state, everybody participates in it. Like when the Great Leap Forward, everyone was encouraged to dig irrigation ditches to try to produce steel on their own. The Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution was an attempt to directly get the population involved within a uprising. Slovak Hungary. I don't think I think pretty sure Hungary during this time period was under Horthy. I'm not sure if Horthy continued to have elections or not during his regency. I always like to think of Horthy as being Grand Admiral Thawne. Um, That's my solution. I like how they're like the regent was a admiral of a landlocked country. I don't know. I always like Horthy. I'm happy that like the Soviets let him go into exile rather than him being executed, as was the fate of some of the Eastern European leaders. Let's see here. See, a lot of it depends on how we're going to classify Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Because once again, you could argue that totalitarian states have more participation from the average population. It's very hard to determine whether these states had a majority support. Because there was elections under Nazi Germany. I mean, they were fake elections, but they might if the Nazis had run free elections, they very well might have won a majority of the vote. So, like, does it necessarily require a free election to confirm the popular will? I think Horthy underwent something of a rehabilitation under Fidesz. Um, Crusader insurgency? What the fuck is this? The Ustache reformed as a group called the Crusaders and fought against the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia? Based? Indonesian National Revolution. Vietnam War is another case where it's kind of hard to really know. I mean, South Vietnam was like nominally a republic. North Vietnam was a socialist state. Once again, it very much determines how you count. If you count people's democracy or guided democracy, or what exactly counts as being a democratic state. No, Horthy wasn't a fascist. Horthy ran a conservative authoritarian government. Um, I'm pretty sure Horthy, I think Marshal Antonescu wasn't even really a fascist. Um, I'm not sure. The status of Bulgaria during this time period was kind of confusing. I'm not sure if necessarily Slovakia even was. Um, there was a lot of governments in Eastern European at the time that were conservative and authoritarian, but they were more, once again, sorry, I used the term conservative again. They were more conservative than fascist, as they tended to want to preserve like pre-World War One power structures and the rule of the elites and the role of the church and kind of traditional values, rather than Nazism, which had a much more revolutionary character to it. Well, let's see here. The Indochina War, that's another interesting one. I'm just going to go through this. Yeah, you have all the Indo-Pakistan things because Pakistan is such a dumpster fire. It's really hard to tell. Now, India, I think, is inarguably a democracy and has been since its independence. So it really depends on what time period we're talking about with Pakistan, what you consider to be a democracy and not a democracy. Also, these things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have an authoritarian executive while still having a democratically elected legislature. Myanmar is just a dumpster fire, um, and it always has been, and it always will be. Once again, when we get into the Arab-Israeli wars, how do we want to classify that? I mean, was Nasser's regime technically democratic? Because he did. I don't think there's really any argument that Nasser did not enjoy the support of the majority of the population. Syria was weird during this time period. Iraq, I think, was a constitutional monarchy. Then you had government under, I forget his name, before the Baathists took over. Baathism is something I want to do a video on at some point. I just need to find out more about it. Because Baathism, I would say, is a form of fascism. It is. So, when people use the term third position as meaning neither left nor right wing, I think most of the time what they mean is conservative or right wing governments that don't embrace liberal economic policies, but they aren't really third position. They aren't necessarily like syncretic per se. They have like conservative social views, or they're nationalist, and then they have like centrist to center left to left wing economic policies. Examples of things that I would actually say are examples of third positionism. That is where you cannot really classify it as either left or right. Would be like, I consider fascism to be a right wing ideology. I just think it's a bit different. It's different from other right wing ideologies. Like, I'd say Baathism is actually third position. Um, because it's really hard to it's very hard to classify it because it has a lot of aspects of both sides, and it's equally supported and equally unpalatable to both the left and the right. Um, so I put Baathism in that category. I would put Peronism in that category. I would say that Peronism is actually a third positionist ideology. But once again, within Peronism, you have like normie conservative Peronists, like federal Peronists. You have communist Peronists. You have like Orthodox Peronists who are like far right. During the reign of, what was her name, Isabella Perón, you took a more fascist direction. Uh, I do think Peronism is actual third position, in which you really can't define it as either being like a right or left movement. Like, I'm trying to think, what are some third positionist governments that are described as? I'm not sure Franco described himself as being a third positionist government, but Spain was just an authoritarian conservative government that prior to its like late Spain didn't have a liberal economic policy. But I don't really see how, even though like the ruling party was called the Phalange, it was much more of, in my opinion, just a conservative technocratic state. Um, yeah, once again, we have the various Israeli Arab wars. I mean, couldn't you argue that the Palestinians are democratic? Because I'm pretty sure Hamas won the election. The fact that they haven't held another election, I'm not sure is really their fault. The West Bank also had an election. So there's also the question of whether or not proxy wars count. Um, to be honest, let's see here. The colonial conflicts are also a difficult one because you have a democratic country that's going up against rebels that at least ostensibly want a democratic society. So you have that aspect of it. Like, how would we classify the Iranian coup d'etat, where you had a socialist, communist leaning government? Um, Sorry, what's TMF again? Refresh my memory. I I should know that. I just don't recall. Um, you had the Shahist. I don't like the term coup. I think it should just be called the Pahlavi or however Pahlavi restoration, because I view it more as the Shah retaking his traditional powers than any kind of radical change to the way that the government was conducted there. We have the Cyprus emergency. Once again, it depends how you want to classify colonial conflicts. Any number of conflicts within the Arab world is more a kind of a difference between who you want to classify it as. Yeah, Basque. Spain has all kinds of ones, especially after Spain became Franco died. Uh, the situation in Ukraine is a complete. I don't know how much I it. I've been pretty adamant that I don't think Ukraine was gonna like collapse until maybe mid 2024 at the absolute earliest, and I thought this war might drag on to 2025, but I don't know now because the Israeli thing has basically screwed Ukraine. Like Ukraine is basically fucked at this point in time because from what most of the world thinks, the Russo-Ukraine war is basically just over. It's over. It doesn't exist. All of Zelensky's support is going to Israel now, and Russia's beginning its offensives. And I just feel what's left of the Ukrainian war material is going to get wiped out. Ukraine has also started to send women to the front lines. Um, yeah, so women are going to be sent to the front lines now. Keep in mind, these women are not going to receive any training. As we saw from Western military advisors, some of these people are getting like 3 days of training before they're thrown into the meat grinder. So if men are being thrown, didn't work when they're throwing into the meat grinder, then I don't really know how else would work. Once again, Indo-Pakistani wars. I mean, once again, is South Africa really not a democracy? My understanding it was a democracy. It was just limited franchise. To be honest, is how I understand it. Ukraine is the NCR confirmed. I don't really think it is. 6 Day War, War of Attrition. I think during this time period, Nigeria was a military junta, and so was Biafra. I think one of the saddest things of the 20th century is that Biafra didn't win, and we could have had Igbo land become independent. Literally, like the best Bantu people are the Igbo by far. Um, they're like I like the Igbo. I'm so sad um, that they didn't get independence. Let's see here. Yeah, once again, we also have like the internal conflict in Turkey. It depends how you count Turkey, is another one. Also depends upon how you count various revolutionary movements. If you consider them wanting to establish a people's democracy to be an actual democracy. So I think that's about all I wanted to cover at the moment. So I think I'm just going to end the video here. I admit I didn't do nearly as well as I thought I did with this video. Um, Probably just because it covered so many different videos, different wars. It was kind of hard to really handle that. Um, so